You're listening to the Real Women in Business podcast. I'm your host, Cass McCrory, and in this podcast, we highlight women in all kinds of businesses. For yourself, someone else, full-time, part-time, overtime hustle, together we will learn from and with one another. And if we get it right, it'll lift us all. Let's get into it. Friends, I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend Vidhi. She is a director of product marketing at a very successful e-clinical firm today, but there's so much more to the story. In this episode, we will talk about what she studied in school, how she had the most interesting childhood traveling across the globe with her family, and a little glimpse into how she defines success today. This is not a podcast to miss. I'm so excited for you to meet her. So let's get into it. Vidhi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Cass. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. I'd love it if you'd share a few words about who you are and what you do today.
Sure. My name is Vidhi Goel. I am the director of product marketing at a e-clinical technology company. A little bit about myself. I actually have an interesting background even prior to going to school. I grew up all over the world. My father worked for an international oil company, and I was born in the UK, and I was raised in Norway and Indonesia. So I love traveling overseas and learning about different cultures. So that's a little bit about myself. From a work perspective, I love marketing. I love technology. And I really enjoy looking at new innovations and figuring out how we can implement them.
That's awesome. So how did you get into this space? Because, that sounds awesome that you were able to travel so much and grow up kind of all over the world. How did you get into this work? How did you develop a love for marketing?
So I've pretty much been doing marketing since I started my career, but I didn't study that as an undergrad student. I studied economics, and I actually minored in chemistry, thinking I might go to medical school. And I got my first job in the back office of a bank, of an investment bank. And one of the things, this was in the late 90s, and so one of the things that was happening at the time was the dot-com boom. And this bank decided that they needed to have an online brokerage. So, think along the lines of like E-Trade or Schwab. I mean, most of the brokerages today are online, but at that time they were not. And so that I was part of a rotational program in the back office. And so when I did my rotation through the online brokerage piece, I was so fascinated by, which was at the time really innovative and cutting edge. And so I left the rotational program, went to the online brokerage part of that bank, and I got into product development. And we worked on new products for the website, which was obviously a brokerage. And it was great. And that was my first job in marketing. It was probably, less than a year after I graduated from undergrad. And I've been in marketing ever since. I've had different marketing roles, and then I went back and got an MBA in marketing as well.
Nice. And I know that the work piece of this is just part of who you are. Tell us a little bit about who you are outside of work.
Well, I have two little girls in first grade and third grade. I really enjoy, I feel like I have very good balance, which is very hard, I feel, for working parents with young children. And so I do love working out. I love volunteering in my children's school. I live in a great community in a very small town where everyone sort of knows everyone. So there's lots of opportunities to volunteer in the community and just participate in overall the town community. So I really do feel like I have a very good balance, and I'm very thankful for that, because I feel like that's what most people strive for.
Yeah. Was it always a good balance, or is this kind of something that you've gotten to at this point?
Yeah, it was definitely not always a good balance. So you asked me earlier how I got into space, and I told you a little bit of how I got into marketing, but specifically this industry that I'm in, the e-clinical industry. I was at a startup, which is now no longer a startup. It's a very established company, but I was there when they went public, and I had my children while I was at the startup. And it was very it was an amazing opportunity to be at the startup. I was there for 6 years. I saw it sort of grow up. I saw it IPO, and it was such a great ride from a career perspective. But it was a very hard time personally because I was pregnant. Twice I had children. I was very, very young, and it was very hard. I did not feel like I had good work-life balance at that time, and I did leave the industry, which is when you met me when I went to Avanade, and now I've come back to the industry, and I really do enjoy this industry. But yeah, back when my children were very young, they were born, and I was at the startup, I did not have good balance.
Thinking back to that person, what advice would you give her today, knowing what you know now?
I honestly think if I could go back, I would say I was so caught up in what I felt like I didn't understand what the definition of success was for me. I had sort of grown up with a very narrow sense of what is success. And it might be in terms of title or monetary success. I mean, there was a very sort of narrow definition of success. And I wish I could go back and tell myself that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take care of yourself. And success can be defined in different ways. Happiness is success, and also even those traditional markers of success, the title, the monetary success, that all can be achieved even later. It's okay to take a breather once in a while. And I wish I could go back and say that. It's funny, it's only been like maybe 10 years, 12 years since I joined that startup, but I wish I could go back and tell myself that success and what you define as success will change throughout your life.
I love that. Because, yeah, I think the version of me at 25, that definition of success is just radically different than my definition of that, 15 years later.
Yeah, it definitely changes.
So what does success feel like for you today?
So I'm still, there's always a little voice in my ear that still tells me, you should be more, you should have a greater title, greater responsibilities, all those things. So there's still that little voice in my ear that says that. But I think for me, success really is happiness and having this balance. I love working. I do not want to stop working, but I also don't want to work 15-hour days and always be on the road traveling, and that would not be success to me, because I wouldn't be able to enjoy the things that I enjoy, like spending time with my family, spending time in my community, doing all the things that I love to do. So I feel like that balance to me, and having that balance is a greater marker of success than having a C in my title, for example.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say that. There's and this has come up in many episodes. So far we've recorded 12 episodes of this podcast, and in at least 4 or 5 of them, women have specifically said this idea of, I've always felt like I was wired for work. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to work, and just even women who don't work outside of the house, so they were working as well. But
oh, yeah.
I've always wanted to work outside of the house. I've always felt a desire to, that success was defined in that way. Part of it was probably how I was raised, but I do product marketing right now, and so I feel like I can see the fruits of my labor, and I take pride in that. And I take pride in what I do, and I enjoy it. And so I've always wanted to work, because it is a part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I wanted to consume my life.
Right. It's a facet, but not the definer.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. I think I definitely have that feeling of I love working, but I don't love it more than I love the whole of my life. So it needs to stay within a container that still feels good for me.
Yeah, I like how you describe that. That sounds right.
Yeah. I'm curious, there's been a lot of media and everything around this Me Too movement, and the rise of the feminine and 50-50 by 2020, all of these initiatives that bring us to a place. And I'm glad to see it. I personally was never in a place where I felt like I didn't have an opportunity because I was a woman. And in many ways, I felt like I had an advantage because I was a woman. And I'm curious where you stand on that.
Well, I don't think I have an advantage because I'm a woman, but I don't necessarily know if it's held me back too much. I mean, I do work in tech, so it is a male-dominated industry,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And when you do see women, you don't, you might see them in marketing, for example, or HR.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see them in maybe quote unquote the roles that are seen as meaty as much. You see them, but it's just fewer. And
Yeah.
so I don't think I've actually been held back per se by being a woman, but I do think that there's probably there's not as much of in terms of mentors or role models. I also feel that um, traditionally women do sometimes crave, and men do too. They want to spend time with their families. They want to be there for the school concerts and things like that. And so in certain industries, that can hold people back. That balance can't be had. I do think in tech, actually, that balance is easier to have because people can work from home a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They can put in long hours and still take, a 30-minute break to go to the school concert or whatever. So I do feel that I'm lucky in the sense that I work in an industry where balance is a little easier to attain sometimes, even while working long hours.
I agree. Yeah, I was actually listening to something on my way in to work this morning, and I'll include it in the show notes, but it was this idea of the split shift and about how when you work in an industry that does have room for people to work remotely and things, you can create a split shift kind of naturally in your work where, yes, I do work from 8:30 until 3, and then I take a break from 3 until 7 because I have very little kids and I don't want to miss their entire childhood because I was working and have the only time that I spend with them each day be dinner, bath, bed routine. And so I'll spend 3 to 7 with them, but then I'll head back to work and work from 7 to 9:30 or get in those hours that I, in quotes, missed.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's becoming more common.
It's completely logical. I unfortunately don't do that. I usually don't see my kids till like 5:30, but if I'm working from home later, if I'm in the office. But the fact that I am home helps with being able to be there, for the school function, being able to take, an afternoon off and volunteer in the school. But I've never heard of that concept of the split shift. I do like it. I don't know a lot of people who do that, but that's an interesting concept.
I think it's an interesting idea, especially for women that do really, and men too, but because this podcast is for women, I'm just going to say for women. I think for us that we do really crave a balance, and we don't want to. I don't want to look back in 20 years and say, "Oh, I missed a lot." For what? A meeting?
Right.
I don't want to have that moment of regret, and I want to have meaningful work. And I feel like this is a small step that I can take that creates a little bit of space for that, because honestly, nobody wants me in a meeting at 3 p.m. I'm completely shot. There's nothing good happening for me after, between 3 and 5:30. Like, you're going to have much better results for me after I had dinner. So I think it's an interesting idea to consider more. And I hope that we provide a platform for those kind of curiosities here.
Yes, for sure. And I know that I've worked in international roles, so sometimes I am on calls at
Yeah.
6 a.m. with Europe or at 9 p.m. with Asia. And so if you do have an international role, say you're taking a break from, let's say, 3 to 7 when people in Asia and Europe are not working, might actually work.
Right.
Usually when I've been in those roles, I just sort of continuously, but take small breaks to see my children. But yes, I do think the traditional 9 to 5 overall, even for non-parents, is going away.
Mm-hmm. I want to get really tactical because I love how you talk about this balance that you've achieved today. And I'd love for you to just kind of walk us through what does a day look like for you?
Yes. And so what I consider balance may not be balance for other people.
Right. And that's awesome, by the way, because I think the more different options we showcase, the better. So this is a judgment-free zone, but I love that we can highlight this is how somebody does it.
Right. And so I just want to preface what I'm going to say with that, but some people might be like, wow, she works way too many hours. That doesn't sound like balance, but it's balance for me. I usually get up early and I go to the gym. If I'm not traveling, I do travel for work every once in a while. But if I am working from home, I work from home. I work in my local office, which is about an hour and a half away sometimes, or I am on a plane traveling to another office or going to a conference. So I'm not always, I don't have a traditional job where I go into the office 5 days a week. I'm sort of everywhere geographically, but I do like going to the gym in the morning. I get that in, especially when I'm working from home. That's easier to do. And I get my kids ready, sort of like the craziness of the 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Get my kids on the bus. I'm working from home. If I'm working from home, I'll get them on the bus. And then I do usually start working at that point. And I have a lot of conference calls for the day. I have a job where people are all over the world. And so the key way we communicate is conference calls. So I will have a solid block of conference calls sometimes until 5 o'clock, or even later sometimes. I'll take small breaks, obviously, but there are days that I have solid conference calls. But I can block my calendar if I know that there's something happening. For example, in my children's school, I'll block an hour and I'll run over to the school, run back, and continue my conference call. So that, to me, makes my life feel like I have balance because I can block my calendar to do those things. I usually will take a break. I don't know if that's considered a split shift, but I'll usually take a break around 5:30 and hang out with my kids, talk to them, take them to their 50 million activities. And then, there's dinner, there's getting the kids to bed. And then, I do usually work again from 8 until about, 10 or so, to check emails, catch up on, work that I have to do. So overall, and that's, like I said, I do travel sometimes, and I don't always work, like every day is not the same for me because I may not be in the same location. But when I am at home, that's sort of my version of a day. And I like that because I feel like I can go to the gym, I can spend time with my children, I can actually participate in activities in school if I need to. There are days that I work really long hours and I don't take that break to see my kids. I see them briefly because there's something due the next day, or I'm working on, a board deck or something. So there are days I work crazy hours. But for the most part, that's sort of my day. Occasionally there might be calls with Asia or with Europe, so they're earlier or later. But that's sort of my version of the day.
I love that. I think that there's something really important about this ownership of your calendar and being able to block off time for your priorities when when those pop up. I feel like that is just a huge control, doesn't feel like the right word, but like having ownership of that time feels like a huge piece of success win.
Yes, I definitely feel like I have ownership of my time. And, there are going to be cases where I just can't participate in something I want to do because there's something more important, but it's rare. And I do actually block off my calendar. I will even block off my calendar sometimes when I'm going to the gym in the morning because you never know.
Right.
Sometimes there is, something with Europe or something. in the morning. So I will block off my calendar so that I know that I have that time to go to the gym, to, help out at the book fair at school or whatever it is that I've committed to.
Mm-hmm.
And that ownership of my calendar is important to me.
I think that so many of us can relate to that. And did you feel like was this something that you commanded or did you ask for? Was just the seniority that you have within the company made that just a given? For somebody that's starting out, that can feel really scary.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been working for over 20 years, but it also depends. So yes, part of it is seniority. Part of it is also the culture of where you work. Like I said, I don't go into an office every single day, and I don't have a desk where I sit at, in an office. I work from home a lot. I'm on a plane and I'm going to another office sometimes or elsewhere. I'm sort of everywhere. And that works for me. And I sought that out because I enjoy working that way. But part of it is seniority, but a lot of it is just the culture of the company and the work you do. Some companies are much more traditional, and also some roles, depending on the company you're at, some roles are going to have much more of that flexibility and some are not. Usually roles where you're expected to travel and manage, where you're going to be at any given time, usually those sorts of roles will give you the flexibility to manage your own calendar. You have to, because honestly, my boss probably doesn't know where I am at a given moment in Ohio, or if I'm in upstate New York, or if I'm in Philadelphia, or wherever I am. So I have to own that calendar.
I think, thinking about my own calendar, I think sometimes I will if I don't proactively block off the time, I do end up giving my day away to other people's priorities. And I've really found great power in doing that, but I have to do it a couple of weeks in advance. Otherwise, I get to the beginning of the week and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have any time in here to actually do the work I wanted to do. And I find myself surprised by that. So I think, ownership of calendar, such a great takeaway.
I also think, though, we talked about ownership of calendar for personal things, but there are times that I know that there's a deadline or something that I know I need to work on. And like I said, my day can get consumed. I can have 8 hours of conference calls in a day. And then you have to use, your evening hours or your night hours to actually do work. And so if I know that there's something, I read an interesting article that said don't make to-do lists, put it like calendar them. And so I've been trying to calendar. Obviously, I need to have some free slots so I can do conference calls with people since that's the culture of where I work. But I do try to, rather than have this ridiculous long to-do list, if I know I need to work on some things in your to-do list are minor and small, but if you know that you have to work on a particular, you have to review a document that a colleague sent you, schedule half an hour for it. And so that you make sure that in that half hour, when it pops up on your calendar and you get the reminder that, oh yeah, for this half hour, I'm going to review that document and get it back to my colleague. And so I also try to calendar within reason. Like, I don't block my entire calendar, but within reason, I try to calendar my to-do list.
That is a great idea. Did you always do this, or how did that evolve?
I did not always do that. And I can't remember where I read it, but it must have been maybe a few years ago where I read, maybe a year or two ago, it's fairly recently, where I read that this was a good sort of productivity tool. And I loved the idea, so I started doing it. And, sometimes your to-do list is just little things. It'll take 5 minutes here, 5 minutes. I don't obviously calendar those. But when you know that you need to get to something and your day can get consumed with other things, it is nice to put in half-hour blocks. And I don't say just like to-do list. I put the actual thing that I need to do. And if there's a document or something that I need to work on, I'll put the document into my calendar notice. So everything's right there. So I know that within that time period, I know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. I know what my goal is to accomplish, like if I have to complete something. and I have all the necessary documents or links if it's a Google, if it's on Google Drive or whatever. I have everything right there. So it just makes me, I feel more productive, and it works for me.
I can see that it would. I mean, it makes such logical sense that I almost feel silly that I haven't been doing that. But it always takes somebody giving you the most, tactical thing. And you're like, oh, yes, I could do that. And that would actually make me more productive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I myself did not do it until probably a few years ago. So I do, it is very logical. And most people don't think to do, or they think that blocking out their calendar is unfair to other colleagues who might be trying to get time with you. Since, for example, for myself, I don't have a lot of free slots within my workday. So sometimes people feel like, oh, but I need to keep my calendar free in case the colleague wants to book time with me. But I think within reason, it's nice to do it this way because then you actually get stuff done. And you do need to there's so many documents you have to review. There's so many, I'm personally collaborating with so many different colleagues. So I have to actually have time to do the physical work. I can't just be, my job is not just conference calls. So
right.
Nice way to ensure that I get work done.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. The next area kind of I'm curious about is where you want to go next. Like what are you learning? What are you curious about? And yeah, what's next?
Yeah, I feel like I ask myself that constantly. It's sort of changed back to our previous conversation about what defines success. So I'm a marketer, and I always thought that my ultimate goal was to be a CMO. And honestly, I have colleagues and classmates who are already CMO at smaller organizations. I feel, I don't know if it's possible, but I think I could do it right now at this stage, especially at a smaller organization. And I thought a lot about that. Is that really right for me? But I'm not sure it is anymore. And I think actually for me, just over the years that I've been working, I really like working with teams. I like international teams. So I definitely want to. Right now, my role isn't as international as it used to be in previous companies. So I definitely want to have an international component, potentially moving overseas, working in another country, living in another country, which is a little hard to do because I'm married and have 2 kids. But I think it's doable. I just have to figure it out and see if it works. So that would be something that I really enjoy doing. I also have managed very small teams thus far, and I think that would be an interesting challenge to manage a bigger team, more so than title, although sometimes they're linked. I think to manage a larger team would be a good learning for me. And so I think the international aspect and also just taking on the challenge of managing a bigger team would be interesting for me.
Do you have an ideal country that you'd like to move everyone off to?
I grew up, my definitive, the 2 countries that really defined me were Norway and Indonesia. But I lived in Norway as a younger child. My earliest memories are of Norway, and we left at 10. And then the bulk of my years were in Indonesia, and I love Asia. And I would love to move to Singapore. I think that would be amazing. I would think it'd be very good for my children we travel internationally with my children a lot. Last year we did go to Indonesia and we went to Hong Kong. Year before that we went to Greece. So my kids have an international exposure, but to physically live in another country day in and day out, I think would be really beneficial for them, just because we live in a global economy and we live in a world where people are from everywhere. And, I live on the northeast of the United States, so I live in a very multicultural town. So I think having that background will be really important for them personally as individuals, but also, when they grow up and they start their careers.
There's something that you get from living internationally that's just so immersive. It's different than travel. And I'm curious, how do you feel like that shaped you?
Well, I moved every few years. So one of the ways it shaped me was that I didn't have that experience of, making friends in kindergarten and having the same friends till I graduated from high school. I had to make new friends every few years. I always went to international schools or American schools, so everyone was kind of like me. Their parents worked in embassies or at a multinational corporation or something like that. But I was physically moving from Norway to Indonesia. I mean, it's very different. You know, I was in London, so that made me more resilient, I think, as a person. That I loved living overseas. I mean, it was the only thing I knew, but I loved, you know, when my father came home and he would say, "Okay, you know, we're moving to a new place." I usually didn't feel fear or sadness. I was usually excited, and I knew I would be fine. That I'd meet new friends, and you know, I'd go to a new school. That would be cool, and it'd be a new adventure. And I think that that's one of the things that is really important about my upbringing that I really value. I mean, it was great to be in other cultures and learn, and I speak multiple languages and all of that stuff that goes with living overseas is nice. But the number one thing is that resiliency and that optimism of, wow, this is really exciting. It's a new adventure, not, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to see my friends anymore. You know, there wasn't a lot of that.
I come from a very different situation where my parents, they lived, you know, within miles of where they grew up. For most of my childhood, I did have that kindergarten to 11th grade friends, but in 11th grade, my parents moved. My father grows onions of all things, right? Lots and lots of onions. And we moved my senior year of high school. And initially, I was really opposed to this. You know, I had a lot of resistance to it. But in making the change, it really did equip me for a greater level of resilience and curiosity and interest in what the adventure next held. And I think that there's truth in that. And I think if we don't nurture that resilience and that spark of adventure in our kids, I feel like it's much harder to develop as an adult.
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's, you know, and I also live in a town where a lot of my neighbors, their parents were born and raised in this town, and they were born and raised in this town. And so there's a lot of people who have that same upbringing that you had, well, until 11th grade.
Yeah.
And there's value in that too. I mean, there's something beautiful about knowing, you know, people and growing up with them and just knowing them at that level, which I didn't have. But on the flip side, I do think being flexible, being resilient, and those sorts of things, it's very hard to teach. You can't just say be resilient. You sort of have to provide the situations in which they can have that.
Yeah, I think the other day I was telling Lexi about something, and she was like, "I just don't understand why they're just not brave." You know, because she has a lot of brave energy these days. And I was like, well, it would be as easy for me to say, go be polka dotted, as it is for me to say, go be brave. Like, this is a learned thing. You can't just claim it or declare it or, you know, order it.
Right.
And resilience, and that definitely, I think resilience and curiosity, the things that are really going to differentiate ourselves as human, when so much can be automated and robots and all of these things, I think that's the defining characteristic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get into the lightning round of questions, which are just super, you know, simple things, I'm curious, is there anything that you wish that you had known earlier, or something that you want your daughters to know about what it's like to be a real woman doing the work of a full life?
You know, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on women. Now there's pressure on men too. I'm not going to say they don't have pressure, but there's a lot of pressure to be a good mom and to be a good employee and all those things in there. So there's just I feel like some people feel like there's a lot of pressure on women, and I just want them to know that they don't have to run the rat race. They can just be who they are, and they can just ignore all of that. And that's what I really love for them, is just ignore all the stuff that's out there. Just be whoever they want to be. And there's no such thing as a great, I mean, if you love your children, you're a great mom. You don't have to, be the Pinterest mom. You don't have to be the best employee working 16-hour days. I mean, I hope they can figure out their own path and their own happiness, and their own success.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we're going to do a lightning round of questions.
Okay.
What is your go-to jam when you need to up your energy?
Oh, like my go-to song?
Yeah.
Oh boy. I don't listen to as much music as I should. Lately I've been listening, it sounds silly, but I really like Hamilton. I really like the soundtrack to Hamilton.
I can relate to that. I definitely have days when I'm jamming to Hamilton hard on the way to the office, and it just feels like I'm ready to bring an uprising. What time do you wake up?
Usually around 5:30.
What do you have for breakfast?
I have chai for breakfast, not the powdered kind. I make my own chai, and I'm slightly addicted to it. So I grind my own cardamoms and put it in a pan, and I simmer it for 30 minutes. So that's my thing every morning. I don't eat like food. I have my chai.
Wow, that sounds so like what a beautiful ritual.
I'm a little addicted to it. When I travel, I'm like, I miss it.
Do you go and get chai from someplace else, or are you like, no, if it's not my chai, it's no chai?
Well, I will never get it from like a Starbucks because that's fake.
Yes.
If I'm at an Indian restaurant or they have like quick serve restaurants, like the equivalent of McDonald's or whatever, but for Indian food, I'll get chai there. But it has to be real chai, not the sugary powdered whatever stuff that they use in Starbucks.
Yeah. Morning person or night owl?
Oh no, morning person for sure. I'll get up at 4:30, but I can't stay up past like 11.
11, that is very late. I am like a firm, if I am awake at 10 o'clock, there's a reason. It's good. Like I am very much, I need sleep. That's a really big priority. I'm just not good if I don't get at least 7
usually
hours.
around 9:30, 10 o'clock, I start shutting down, but
yeah.
I can make it till 11 if I really try.
There's a reason, and it's a good one. It's like, oh, there's a great concert, or there was a movie or something. Like I'm not just somebody that just stays up. What is the book you give most?
The book I give most. Oh boy. Well, right now, I mean, it's probably changed depending on where I am in my life right now.
Oh, sure.
But I have to say, right now, the book that's just in my life the most is the Harry Potter series. It's not the most intellectual book or the book I love the most, but just given where my children are and what we talk about all the time, I feel like I'm rereading and gifting Harry Potter books a lot lately. I think they're great books for kids, but obviously it's probably not the best book out there for adults.
I think there's so much whimsy there. I was a little bit older when the series came out, so it wasn't something that I read as they were coming out. And so, starting to think about reading them with my kids, it's like, oh yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of whimsy and curiosity in those. So I think that's awesome.
I love the Harry Potter books, but we are also rereading for me the Tolkien books. The Lord of the Rings,
oh yeah.
Lord of the Rings. So I find myself rereading these books I read as a child. Well, Harry Potter came out when I was an adult, but like Lord of the Rings series, I'm rereading some of those books, or Wrinkle in Time, or the Narnia series with my children, or I read them myself, but then we talk about it. And that's actually really fun because I don't think I would reread a lot of those books on my own. I would seek out newer books. So it is fun to go back and reread those books.
Nice. What can someone do to help you feel appreciated?
I really believe that everyone should be respected in the work world, regardless of your title, what you do. And to me, I like to treat everyone with respect, and I want that respect back. I don't respond well when people bark orders or come off with a sense of superiority. So for me, just treat me with basic respect It sounds very basic, but unfortunately in the work world, it doesn't always happen for whatever reason. There are always going to be individuals who just don't follow that. And so I think treat me with respect for me and respect for my work.
It seems simple, but yeah, it's definitely not something that you can take for granted.
I actually think it doesn't happen very often, unfortunately.
I think that so many of the tools that are used today in work actually feed the lack of respect that can happen between colleagues. I feel like, tools like Slack, they just create such an on-demand access and pings and, all of these different chat modalities. I feel like they go away from the opportunity of treating somebody with respect. I feel like they just are like a demand engine.
Yes, and we're emailing people. Like I said, a lot of my interactions with my colleagues are not face to face. Very few are face to face, and I think it's easy to hide behind a screen or an email or an IM.
Yeah, it's easy to see people not as the people that they are when they just exist in kind of an online bubble.
Right.
So, Vidhi, something that we've heard in the podcast a number of times now is that when women craft really intentional lives, it doesn't always just come naturally. Or like there's usually a moment, a turning point where you're like, oh, I need to do this. And I'm wondering if that holds true for you.
Yes. And so I always followed a very sort of defined path, which was sort of how my family raised me, where, you went to undergrad, you got a good job, you worked really hard, you went to grad school, and then you got a good job and you worked really hard, and you were supposed to get successive title increases and more responsibility. And that was sort of like this defined career path, what I was supposed to do. And when I was at a startup and I had my children at that startup, it was a lot. It was very intense. And while I loved being at the startup and I learned so much, I was really, truly unhappy towards the end of the 6 years I was there. I was unhealthy. I wasn't sleeping right. I wasn't eating right. And I wasn't really seeing, my children as much as I wanted to, or my husband. And so it was a really unhappy point in my life. And I did actually quit my job, and I took probably about 7 or 8 months off. And I really thought a lot about, well, what is success? What do I want? And it was really hard for me because all my life I was told that this is the path of success. And now I was questioning it. And I did actually take a step down in my career. I left my industry. I don't regret it. It didn't really help me in my career per se, but it helped me in my personal life because I was able to get that balance that I wanted. And now I'm back in my industry and I'm back to where I was in terms of my title and all of that. And I feel like I'm in a good place now, but I had to fight for this balance that I want. And I still continuously have to fight for it because it doesn't come naturally. And I continuously have to, battle my own little voices in my head sometimes, and even my family sometimes, who might think that, that is not a successful path, that I haven't taken the right path. So I think forming your own path and deciding what is your own success is really hard. It's not easy.
Thank you for the vulnerability and sharing that today, because it isn't easy and it is worth it. And you showed that in so many different ways today. Thank you. That is just important to share, and I'm glad that you did.
Thank you.